My guest today is Dr. Patrick Lockwood. Dr. Lockwood is a psychologist, a leader in behavioral healthcare, and so much more. And one of the things I love about being in a conversation with Patrick is one never knows what will emerge. So how about that for a welcome, Patrick?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Who knows what's going to happen? That's what's fun about talking to you.
It's true.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, literally.
Literally.
Yeah. So what were you thinking? This thing's called unharmable.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell me what you think that means, or I'm happy to start if you'd prefer.
Yeah, you tell me. I'm very curious.
So I'll give you the actual history, which I haven't done yet on this show. In 2020, early 2020, our friend, Jeremy Miller, asked me, what is the through line of your three books? So I have Conscious Being, Conscious Recovery, and Conscious Creation. He said, what is the through line that makes this a trilogy?
Right.
And I said, that's very simple. The message on all of them is underneath everything, there is an essential place within you that is unharmed and unharmable, a whole and perfect essence of who and what you are. So that's the founding principle of conscious recovery, as you know. And so that then became something that we launched because we think we're clever on 10/10/2020. We kind of launched it into the world and just invited people to ask themselves the question, what if there is a place within me that's unharmable, and how might knowing that change your life?
Okay. Yeah, I remember having this conversation with you a while ago about conscious recovery, and so I'm still stuck though, because as a clinician, I think I see the world very differently. Not in the sense that there isn't some core self that people appreciate or respect, or even just an idea of yourself. It's more like, I don't think that anyone I've ever worked with professionally has ever had the thought that there's a core piece of themselves that was unharmable. And I can't imagine having the experience of being a clinician and hearing someone say that.
Well, you're having it now.
Yes.
So what is the experience like for you?
It's utterly confusing.
Okay.
Yes.
What's confusing?
Well, there's two things that confuse me, and they come from two different places. Okay. So the first thing, which is I think easier to knock out in this conversation, is we have, I would say, 130, 40 years of theory, and it's theory, that says, depending upon what happens when you're very, very young, things happen to you that shape the way your brain functions, that leave you altered in a way that you were not supposed to be altered. So you are harmed in theory, according to psychodynamic theory, all the different types of theories that you're trained in graduate school. I train people to do in graduate school as a professor. And so I'm stuck on that. I can work my way around that, but I'm still stuck there, admittedly. And then the second one, which I think is a little more complicated than even all that, is how do you convince somebody that there, A, is a core thing in there that you can't see, touch, or feel without maybe glimpses or something? And B, how do you convince somebody of what really is true when they can't know it?
So I can answer that, of course.
Yeah.
I'll speak through experience first, and then I can go to sort of the philosophical framework.
Sure, yeah.
And how I came to it in my life experience that led me to this conclusion.
Sure. Yeah.
First, through experience.
Yeah.
Working with clients, let's say working with clients who have an addiction who are in treatment, because thousands of people I've worked with in that place.
Sure.
And when the concept, which is really never delivered as a knowing, always as a question. Because the truth is, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is going to ring true for the person sitting in front of me. This is just a possibility.
Sure, yeah.
I always want to frame it as that.
Yeah.
So it's a what if. What if, Patrick, let's say you're 30 days sober and you're in treatment. Let's say. And, you've been to treatment 7 times. And there's a reason I'm saying it that way. You've been told that you have a disease that's incurable, that can only be treated one day at a time.
Yeah.
You may have received diagnoses that lead you to believe that you have a biological or a chemical disorder.
Yeah.
We call it a disorder.
Yeah.
And not everyone, but a high 90% of the people that are sitting on the other side of you are going to say something like, this is something that we need to eradicate in some way. It's the Western medical model. What are your symptoms? These symptoms are not serving you, so let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
So even introducing to you, the person sitting there for the 7th time in treatment, what if we were to look at this differently? Can you remember a time when you were really little being whole, complete, and perfect, or filled with love and joy before the world programmed you to believe you were something other than that? And if you can't remember that, do you have any small children in your life, a pre-programmed human of 1, 2, or 3 years old? And do you look at them and say they're damaged? So introducing it as a possibility, and I've had clients literally break down crying at that moment.
Yeah.
And it's a recognition that finally someone is saying something different than what's wrong with you and how do we get rid of it.
Yes, so I think there's 2 ways to skin that particular cat from the clinical perspective. One is people are so full of shame, self-doubt, self-hatred, etc., that they're just desperate for any sense of, I'm not broken, which you and I both know that I'm not a fan of the concept of broken, obviously. So that's one thing. So even if it's not technically true, like scientifically true, it would be still very relieving to have an alternative thought that eradicates some of the shame and the potentiality to be a different person, or creates potentiality to be a different person, for sure. But then the second thought I had, which literally just occurred to me, is they don't have the capacity to see themselves as inherently good.
Right.
Essentially.
Right.
Which is a rephrasing of what you're trying to say, I think. Whereas I think a lot of people with addiction or whatever mental health issues see themselves as not only inherently broken, but also inherently bad because of the fact that they're sick or whatever happened to them or trauma, what have you.
Absolutely. And the profound shift, let's talk about the addiction paradigm. So in 1935, Alcoholics Anonymous started, and they said, no, you're not bad, you're sick.
Yes.
And that was groundbreaking, revolutionary, and it moved us into a really beautiful new way of seeing it.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm saying now it's time to take this a little further. What if we're not sick, but we are actually, all of the behaviors that we have had have been to manage this sense of brokenness. And so now I'm going to share the story of, in my own life's journey, why I've come to this perspective.
Sure.
And that is, when I was that person, newly in recovery and 20 years old, almost 21, and found myself suicidal around a year to 18 months sober, and I met a woman named Mary Helen. I talk about her often. I've dedicated my life's work to her.
Sure.
She saw me through a different lens. And that lens, I know, because of her spiritual perspective, was she was looking for the wholeness and perfection within me instead of the brokenness and damage. And it was in that viewing me that something started to shift internally. Now, first I rejected it.
Sure.
Because she would say, darling, you're so precious. And I would say, what?
Yeah.
I am not, I'm broken, I'm damaged, here's why, here's what happened. So like, I was very much on board with something happened to me that permanently damaged me.
Yeah.
That was my point of view.
Sure.
She came in with a different possibility, and now, you know, of course, with quantum mechanics, we realize that the observer has a profound effect.
Sure.
So her seeing me differently started giving me access to this. And it changed everything for me, because I realized that all the times I'd caused harm in the world, which had been plenty and I was carrying shame about, was when I believed I was broken. Even an inkling of an idea that there might be a place deep within me, because at first it's very, very deep down, down, in this little tiny little place that might be whole and perfect, changed everything. Because when I knew that, I was acting from that understanding.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that it had that effect for you, because in my experience as a clinician especially, I think many of the people that I see, especially in addiction treatment, are radically struggling. I think radically is probably not even a strong enough word. And so they genuinely believe that there's no other possibility of a world where they're not miserable in every way, shape, and form. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that they see themselves as a broken creature. And so your experience lines up with so many people I've seen, worked with, friends of mine. It's pretty common in that regard. I think Where I get stuck, and I'm still stuck, and I don't know if I'll be unstuck, but we'll see, is I think that partially my worldview is admittedly very different in the sense that I come from more of this Buddhist background where there's this no self idea, right? There's this idea that attaching to, clinging to, right? That's the source of suffering. So the idea that I have to be perfect and whole, or the idea that I have to be broken, or any idea that I have to be, is where misery lies. And so I think part of where I'm getting stuck with this, not that you're wrong or that it's not helpful, I think it's probably helpful to probably millions of people. Where I get stuck is if you're attaching to something you could or should be, then I think that's where you're going to suffer no matter what. And so for me, I don't want people to suffer if they don't want to. And the more you attach to, I could be whole and perfect, or I could be broken, or I could be both, which both are possible in this theory, then you're still going to be suffering because there's something you think you're supposed to be. And my approach as a clinician, but also as a person, this is just my personal approach to things, so maybe this is biasing everything, which it usually does. My approach is, why do we have to be anything? Right? Like, I think I've told you this in our private conversations before. I'm really not trying to do or be anything. If things just kind of show up, I'm happy to be here for the ride. Like, I didn't manifest this conversation with you. I never once asked you to sit down for a conversation, at least that I'm recalling. And so you just kind of offered to me, and I'm just kind of showing up, right? That's even how our relationship started. I didn't seek you out. You didn't seek me out 5 or 6 years ago or whatever it was. It was just like we happened to be in the same room, and I was like, oh, this is someone who thinks a lot like me. I want to talk to him, right? There was no planning. There was no plotting. I didn't want to be something, right? And I think that's where I want to be personally. And I think that's something that I try to, in a relatively unbiased way, share with my patients. Because I think a lot of society conditions us, family, friends, everyone conditions us to be something. And that's unavoidable, no matter what. And I'm not saying we can eradicate that. I'm just saying my experience has been very different from yours in the sense that I went from, like you, there's a brokenness, there's something wrong, to there's really not anything wrong, I figured it out, blah, 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 to now it's just like, why do I have to be anything? Not that I can't enjoy things or want to do things, but if I'm attaching that to a core essential self, and like in the Buddhist sense, then I'm going to suffer. Because Patrick is supposed to be something. Like, am I really? Am I Professor Patrick right now? Am I Psychologist Patrick right now? I'm actually none of that. I'm just a dude, I think, sitting here having a conversation. So that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know if that's a good place to be necessarily, but in your worldview, how does that gel, not gel?
Well, I mean, in your worldview, it wouldn't matter if it's a good place to be because it's where you are.
Right.
So that's this beautiful place of neutrality, right?
Yes.
It's actually very congruent.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying it's who and what I am.
Yeah.
I'm saying that like there's an essence. Like, let me rephrase that. I am saying it's who and what I am, ultimately, because ultimately that's true.
Right.
And then there's all the different layers that I put on top of it.
Yeah.
The reason that, and it's very aligned with Buddhists because it's the Buddha nature. It's the essence of us. It's the soul, right? And so a lot of spiritual teachings point to this. Some point a very different direction. Some say you're inherently broken and you have to like surrender or find a savior to save yourself.
Yeah.
But a Buddhist approach would be very in alignment with what I'm saying. Okay. There's an essence that's unchangeable. They might say unchangeable, right? And then there's the who I identify as, my personality that creates, and the suffering is, I want more of what feels good and less of what feels bad.
Right.
And whenever I cling to the idea of good and bad, I'm suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's actually very congruent because as I understand the whole and perfect place, very different than perfectionism.
So that's probably where I'm stuck, because you use the word perfect, which I think the average person walking around has the word perfect in their head as something like ideal. Like,
exactly.
There's the hottest version of me, the richest version of me, the smartest version of me, and that is what people think is perfect. And I don't know if that's what you mean.
It's not at all what I mean. And honestly, Patrick, I'm very provocative, as you know. And I did sit with that and said, do I want to use the word perfect? And, You know me well enough
Yeah.
to know that I intentionally use the word so
Yes.
that these conversations would happen.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about perfectionism. Perfectionism is a strategy to manage usually the opposite.
Yes.
I feel unworthy, so I'm going to look perfect.
Totally.
I feel out of control in this relationship, so I'm going to be the perfect spouse.
Yes, sure.
My environment feels out of control, so on the extreme end, I'm going to have what we call OCD. Yeah. Everything's in alignment,
Yep.
and I'm fine.
Totally.
Essential perfection is completely different. It is not at all something to be gained. It is not at all something to be earned. And it has nothing to do with my personality self or how I'm perceived. It is an essential place. And so when I do trainings with clinicians, they push back.
Sure.
It's fun.
Yeah.
You know, what do you mean perfect?
Yeah.
I've had them literally say, why don't you just change that word? It would be easier. And then I will say, but we wouldn't have had this conversation. Right, because I invite them to read, and we're talking about conscious recovery now, slow down and read the first principle, and there is an essential place within us that is whole and perfect. And that can be used interchangeably with unharmable, because there is a belief, a philosophy in most psychology, as you already stated, that there is something that's permanently damaged, and that we at very best can learn how to work with it. Right.
Permanent, I think, is a strong word. It depends upon the kinds of injuries you experience when you're younger. So some of it would be permanent, some of it would not be.
But there's an idea that some of it would be.
Yes, absolutely.
And what if that's not true?
That's a really good question. And I think we could actually test it empirically if we wanted to. I don't know that anyone out there is actually interested, but we could.
I'm interested.
Yeah.
Let's test it.
Yeah, we should.
Because what I want to test is not, is it true or not? What I want to test is what happens when one identifies that there's a place that can never be healed, or there is an essential place, because that's the essence of this. It's not, is it true? Because, you know, as much as it's not popular to say alternative facts, I mean, we all have our own version of reality.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Right? And we know with any experiment, if you and I go into it with an assumption, it will affect the outcome of the experiment.
Of course, yeah.
Right. As much as I love evidence-based practices.
Sure. Yes, I know. I mean, there's just all sorts of problems with the research there, for sure. I think the thing that you're pointing to that is really worth reiterating, at least from my perspective, is if people were to view themselves as some original state that they were supposed to be, perhaps, then that is more valuable than something that they currently see themselves to be or something they could be, I think. And I think that language will work for any clinician because, you know, even if you go to the old school psychodynamic, psychoanalytic way of looking at things, the idea is you had some personality state when you were born, and then, you know, what happens in the first couple of years of life helps organize what we were kind of genetically gifted with, and then, you know, that gets shaped and sometimes damaged or just shaped and molded. And so, like, in theory, if everything went great in the first 8 years of life during early development, what would you have looked like? Yeah. That could be a similar way of saying what you're saying with essentially whole and perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And when talking with a person who's not a clinician,
sure,
I really just want someone to open up the possibility of that.
Yeah, that it's just an alternative that's possible.
It's an alternative possibility, right? And you know that my theme of this year is from pathology to possibility.
That's right.
And when we pathologize, whatever it is, like when I'm provocative and I'm doing a talk at a spiritual center that's very focused on prosperity, I'll say even saying I'm going to make $10 billion is a limitation. It's a number.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, you know,
it
might be a really nice number that we want to attach to.
For sure.
And we also know from our other conversation, I might suffer if I only make 9. But, you know, that's all of this, you know, idea of once we have an idea of what it needs to be, but when we're in the possibility, different things open up.
Yeah. The limit thing is actually really important to me also because I think many people I've trained as professionals, as future clinicians, and then patients I've worked with, both in those categories of my experience, people think there are limits that are real that are absolutely not real. Right? For example, one of my colleagues is this phenomenal therapist who genuinely is a good person who will be probably a better clinician than I will ever be. And this person has a couple of what you might call limiting beliefs that keep them just kind of like stuck.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what we do in supervision, because I'm this person's supervisor, is talk about how there are contrary examples beyond these limiting beliefs. And they happen every week when we sit down for supervision. And so I'm not doing any magic. There's zero. What I like about you is you and I are very similar.
Yeah.
Neither of us believe in magic. We
Correct.
believe in very common sense realities that people are either afraid to see, cannot see, or don't want to see, right? Because we've been conditioned or harmed or whatever, right? And so he and I get to have this conversation in supervision a couple of times a week, and he gets to see that he is far different than he imagined himself to be when we first met. And that's gratifying because these limiting beliefs aren't based on who he actually is. It's some combination of how he sees himself and how I see him. It's a collaborative, interactive experience.
Yeah.
And through this interaction, these limiting beliefs start to disappear.
Right. And to take it a step further, when we're talking about clinicians, because in this case we are, what limiting beliefs do they have about the person sitting in front of them?
Dozens.
Hundreds of thousands sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
And if we're in the paradigm, Patrick's sitting in front of me and I've read his chart and he has these 3 diagnoses. Therefore, he has this limitation.
Yes.
And if I were to even entertain the possibility that underneath all that is a place of wholeness and perfection or unharmability, then I would say Patrick has the ability to start to question these behaviors. And the behaviors aren't necessarily anything negative. These behaviors are a way that you have constructed your life to survive or to feel safe.
Sure.
Or to, at very least, keep, what feels too scary at bay.
Yeah.
So they're beautiful. I call them brilliant strategies, as you know.
Yeah.
So, but then we want to take a look and say, what do you truly desire?
Yeah. Are there other strategies?
Are there other strategies? Or, to take it even a step further, because you got the ball rolling earlier, to move beyond strategies altogether.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That would be my goal would be a giant flow state for everyone at all times.
Right.
And I try to live that way. I try to not think or plan or anything. I have no clue what we're here to do. And so we'll figure it out together. It'll be fun. And I think that's achievable for most people. I think the reason your title of this show is so good and so helpful is because the average person walking around believes they're not only being harmed by the world or themselves, they also believe that they will never have a fair shake at being better.
Right.
I think many people, even in, we live in the richest, most prosperous society on the planet right now, and people think that their lives are horrible because they're not the Kardashians or a billionaire tech person or something like that. And it's like, you have more safety, more food, more health, more opportunity than ever in history. And people love you and care about you and actually want to talk about you, and you're annoyed that they want to text you. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, people actively, I think, harm themselves to go against your narrative by treating themselves as if they are this thing that is disadvantaged.
That's right.
When in reality, they're just what they are.
Yeah, and to put it into context, and we'll say it as a part of me, right? Because I say there's an essential place within me that's unharmed and unharmable does not mean that I have not had events in my life that have caused harm to my psyche, to my spirit, to my personality, and that we look at and we heal.
Yeah.
But a starting point of underneath all of that, there's still this essential place, then allows us to question the narrative. There's actually a book out right now, I don't remember the title, but it points to exactly what you're saying. We're living in the best time on planet Earth, but a lot of the narrative is we're living in the worst time on planet Earth. And I'm going to be a very Gen X at this moment, but some young people are like, we survived the very worst. And they'll name COVID and they'll name, and I'm like, my grandmother, World War I, the Depression, World War II. Like, I didn't live through that, but I can't possibly say. Now, the issue with this, and I will just say right out of the gate, the issue with this is Someone watching or listening right now might say we're minimizing or wanting to minimize a life experience. There are events in a person's life based on all sorts of different things that can cause harm to parts of ourselves.
Sure.
And what we're saying is, in the midst of that, through compassionate inquiry, right? Compassionate questioning, I can start to dismantle that. I will sit alongside my fellow gay men, and they will say, because I've been traumatized as a gay man, the world is against me. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a true statement in relative reality.
Sure.
In my reality, that was true for me until I healed. And I'm not saying I crossed the finish line of healing.
Sure.
I healed enough to realize that, yes, that trauma did happen.
Sure.
Yes, I was called the F word every day in high school.
Sure.
Yes, it was an event that caused a lot of harm to parts of me.
Sure.
And the part of me that's unharmed and unharmable allowed me to heal enough of the other part where my worldview is different now.
Sure. I think that would be very understandable for most people. And the problem that I see with that specifically is I think that people are very invested in what they believe is true about themselves. I think,
absolutely,
just to make it super simple, I imagine there's so many people walking around with a pie chart in their head, right? There's 8 slices to my self-concept. I'm a person, I'm a male, I'm gay, I'm this, there's all these slices of the pie.
Right.
And they don't have any space for another slice, the slice you're talking about, which is the piece of me that's unharmable.
Right.
But beyond even the fact that they have a rigid pie chart in their brain, I don't think they can imagine a 3-dimensional pie chart.
Right.
Because I think that there's all sorts of history, and I think there's all sorts of not knowing, right? So like the old school UCLA concept for addiction treatment is the Johari window. There's the 4 facets of yourself. There's the public self that everyone sees and you see. There's the private self, the stuff you only share to yourself and not the world. There's your blind spot that only the world sees. And then there's this 4th quadrant, right? Which is nobody knows what this piece of you looks like. You can't see it, the world can't see it, only time can tell you what you're actually going to look like. And the example I always give people is like, are you currently a parent? Because if you're not currently a parent, you have no clue what the parent version of you is going to look like. We can theorize all day long, but until you got a kid, you have no clue what you're going to feel like. And that's why I like that, because it feels analogous to what you're talking about. Like, people think that the self-concept is set, it's done, I know who I am, I'm this, that, and the other. And that thought process is part of what pushed me towards Buddhism in the first place back in undergrad. Is like, I can't imagine attaching to this pie chart anymore, because when I think that way, I limit myself.
Well, and this is the thing where we've come full circle, because that's exactly what I'm saying. Like when I'm anchored in the unharmable self, these things become what I have, not who I am. And when I switch to what I have and not who I am, everything changes, because then I can start to question the things I have.
Sure.
I used to attempt to do that in a group in treatment. It didn't go so well. Like, I put a line down the middle of the board and had clients brainstorm who they are and what they have. But what's interesting is how people really held on to.
Oh, yeah.
This is who I am.
Oh, yeah.
I remember working with a young man, and he said, I am an athlete. It's who I am. And then I said, well, what happens if you lose your 2 legs? Are you still an athlete? Mm-hmm. Or is it what you have?
Yeah.
Is there something beyond that? I mean, we had enough trust built that I could say that with
Sure.
him. But the reason that this is important, and we're not just talking about, addiction or mental health.
Yeah.
We're talking about life.
Everyone.
When I identify, and we end up to go a little deeper, because we like going a little deeper. There's something innate within the human experience that wants to feel safe. And one of the ways that we believe we're going to feel safe is to find a tribe of like-minded people.
Sure.
They're called political parties, they're called religions, they're called a lot of things. And the idea is that if I can find a place that's just safe to have the same agreements, then I'll be safe. The issue with that is if I start to question anything from the paradigm, I might get thrown out. So, I mean, we know the old experiment where it was a psychology experiment from the 1960s, and they lined up 7 people, and the first 6 were in on the experiment. Only person 7 wasn't in.
Yeah.
And they said, "What's 2 plus 2? 5.
Yeah.
5, 5, 5." And the 7th person said 5.
Yeah.
It like this outrageously high number of times.
Yeah.
And obviously it wasn't maybe that simple, 2 plus 2, but it was something that was a shared collective understanding. And this person, by the time they heard evidence, so let's lean into that. And so if I've been told I'm broken, if I've been told I'm disadvantaged because of this, that, or the other, that will become my reality.
Yeah.
I never want to minimize or come from a place of judgment about that, but encourage one to be curious about it.
Curiosity in general would be a great place to start for everyone, myself included. I think I'm at my best when I'm curious and open. I am at my worst when I know things. You know?
That is so true.
You know?
Maybe we should just end the show. Wait, say that again, Patrick. I'm at my best
when I'm curious and open, and I'm at my worst when I know things.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell my students too. Like, I walk into classes multiple times a week, and the idea is this is a conversation where we explore things. So these are the things we know, they're on the slides and stuff, but we're there to actually have a conversation.
Well, based on that, I feel pretty good about my answer with unharmable. I'm like, I don't know if it's true. I'm curious what gets created when we believe that or when we experience that. Because, I like to say I'm becoming a cop, curious, open, and present. My husband told me to stop saying it. He's tired of hearing it. So sorry, Will, I did it again.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. Because when I'm in that compassionate curiosity, first of all, there's more connection and there's more possibility.
Yeah. I think I would only remove compassion from your list, but otherwise I love it.
No, curious, open, and present.
Oh, I thought you said
those
compassion.
are my 3. No. I said through compassionate curiosity.
Yeah, I would get rid of that.
And the reason I say compassionate curiosity is I have, and I'll speak for myself, I have been brutally curious about myself. Why do I keep doing that? What's wrong with me?
Yeah, sure.
Those are curiosities.
Sure.
But those are not helping me. Ultimately. So I like to look at the power of the open-ended question, but I like to add whether it's compassion, maybe it's just curiosity, but something that is more opening. Because I've used, it's like when you use motivational interviewing, but you can still lead someone the way you want them to go.
Absolutely. You can be completely disrespectful and pretending you're respectful, for sure. And so I think the only reason I would push back on compassion in this conversation is, although I think all of us genuinely believe compassion is a good thing, and I myself believe compassion is a useful thing, the problem I have with it in this particular conversation only is it's adding a layer or a filter, and it's removing the openness to some degree. If that makes sense. And to be truly open in the Buddhist non-judgmental sense, good judgment, bad judgment, loving judgment, non-loving judgment, it's a problem. Because when there's a judgment, there's an attachment. And when you're attached, you're going to suffer.
Right.
So not that completely contradicts anything. I think it's just you and I might be shooting for slightly different targets. However, I think we're trying to get to relatively similar places in what we do, both separately and together.
Yeah.
So some people desperately, badly need compassion because they've had none in their life. Yeah. So I think why that matters in your breakdown. For me, as a clinician, I'm trying to push people away from needing that if it's possible.
I like it. Well, because I can unconsciously co-sign on someone's narrative or worldview, which I always want to be curious about it, right? And, I will say, this is going to sound like I'm going on a different journey, but I swear it's related to this. I have recently been bold in saying if I'm a clinician or if I'm doing any kind of coaching or counseling, if I don't have the same openness and curiosity with a person wearing a rainbow flag as a MAGA hat, I have work to do. It's not good, bad, right, wrong. But if I notice I have any kind of, is there anything about this person based on that symbolism, there's more opportunity for me to be curious.
Yes, I just don't think the average person wants to be curious because I believe that not only we're not conditioned that way, because tribes, politics, religion, all these things you said, I also think that there's a self-protectiveness that is adaptive. I don't think it's wholly maladaptive. I think that the average person, and I don't ever mean that phrase pejoratively, I just mean like if you just pick a random person out of a hat, like the average person does not function well with radical openness because we don't live in a world that not only like allows that to be a thing, but we also don't live in a social world where radical openness or interest or curiosity or detachment in the Buddhist sense is going to allow you to have a job. Because if you wear the wrong colored tie or wrong colored hat or whatever it is, you get canceled and all this stuff. And I think that the average person doesn't have the skills or awareness or support they deserve to live that life. And so to me, what you're trying to do is inherently extremely important. My very biased approach to this is you're trying to do the unthinkable, which is to provide people an environment where they have people like yourself who are willing to be radically open and curious and present and not attached to what color the hat is or the tie is or your religion or whatever it is. And that's rare. That's rare, and it doesn't really make a lot of people money. It makes you more money to pick a team, yell and scream at each other, and cheer on the people who are good and say the other people are bad and all that stuff.
Yes.
And so, like, you're probably not going to be rich anytime soon, but I love what you're doing.
Well, I'm not going to affirm that. I'm going to say you're right about that it seems easier, but all I'm inviting someone to do, because I love your worldview of like, let's be radically open.
Yeah.
All I'm inviting someone to do is just try it a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing changes if nothing changes.
Sure.
And many of us, I would, maybe it's 80% of the world still believes the world's happening to them. And, there's good, bad, right, wrong, and us and them. And maybe it's 85%, but let's say 80.
Yeah.
I'm inviting someone that's in that camp to say, what if there's a different possibility?
Yeah.
What if I can actually sit down in front of someone who has a different political viewpoint or a different religion or lack of religion or some radical idea that's different than I am? What happens if I'm curious about someone's conversation about vaccines instead of immediately have a judgment? Right? All I'm inviting is just to open that a little bit. And my hope and my experience is once I do that, then I can say, what do I experience when I do that? Wow, I experience more peace. I experience more connection. I experience more openness, which feels good instead of scary. Because I agree, like we've built this construct to feel safe and it's an automatic response. And the truth is it does keep us safe to a degree.
Yes.
If I want a different experience in life, here we go. This is a big, bold statement. I need to do something different. My friend Michael Beckwith says, the New Thought movement, he says, if you want to join the New Thought movement, have one. It's kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
If I want to expand and change and shift and grow, I'm going to have to change and expand and shift and grow. And I think the easiest way to do that is through curiosity.
I think the wanting to is where people will get stuck.
Right.
And because wanting requires motivation, it requires some thing that has happened or, right, you and I both talked about treatment a lot this discussion, and we both come from the treatment world, and so people want to in that setting because their life is falling apart and they're miserable and detoxing and all these things. The average person walking around right now might not be particularly intrinsically motivated to want a different experience. They might like their safety. Their safety might feel not only normal and acceptable, but optimal. I think a lot of people have been sold a bill of goods. They've been sold the bill of goods that optimal safety is actually where your life is going to sparkle.
Right.
Right. Whereas I think you and I both know many wildly successful entrepreneur types who do not live in the world of optimal safety. In fact, some of the best entrepreneurs take the wildest risks.
That's right.
And they're open and curious and all this stuff. And so I think that is actually an example of something that people could think about is if you really did have some goals in your life, personal goals, relationship goals, financial goals, whatever. And you thought of it like an entrepreneur. What do they do to succeed? They take chances. They're curious. They're open. They do what works and they avoid the crap that doesn't work, right? And that's kind of what you're selling, essentially, is being curious, being open, taking chances. You're pitching people, take a chance with me, right? And how cool is that? Because most people on TikTok and YouTube aren't saying, take a chance with me. They're just saying, they're screaming at the camera saying, this is my worldview and you should believe me.
Yeah.
You're just like, take a chance. Let's see what happens.
See, what if that's not the whole story?
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Patrick, as always, this has been a very enlightening and enlivening conversation. And I mean that genuinely, because I love that in some ways, one could perceive that we come at life in a very different way, but we come to very similar conclusions along the path.
Yeah.
And I think we come to very similar curiosities, which is even more important.
Yes.
So, as always, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know we're going to have more conversations, but thank you for this one.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.